The Alpha's thoughts were a blade. Even from across the great hall, Ilara felt the psychic blow. She didn't hear the words, she never did, but she saw the aftermath. A hulking warrior, a man with scars on his face and hands that could snap a tree branch, flinched. He actually flinched, his shoulders curling inward, as if to protect himself from a physical strike. But then, there was no sound. Not a single word was spoken. Because of that, the silence was worse than any shout. It was a cold, heavy blanket of power that smothered the room, a language she could never understand. Her own mind was a quiet, empty space in a house screaming with silent conversations. And she let that happen. Deep down, she knew the truth. That emptiness was both her shield and her curse. She kept her head down, her knuckles white around the soft, polishing cloth. Lemon oil and old silver. That was her world. She focused on the scent, on the circular motions her hand made, on anything but the crushing weight of the Alpha's presence. Her goal was simple. It was always the same. Be invisible, be quiet, be nothing. To be nothing was to be safe. In fact, her life depended on it, because a half-blood with no voice mark was an abomination, an error to be erased. A shadow fell over the silver platter she was polishing. You. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. Thump, 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 thump. It was the only sound in her head. She didn't look up right away. Instead, she finished one last, slow circle with the cloth before setting it down. Only then did she rise slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "Yes, Anya?" she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. Anya was the head housekeeper, a she-wolf whose stern face looked like it had been carved from stone. Her scent was sharp, like pine needles and discipline. "Your work here is adequate," Anya stated, and the word hung in the air, a backhanded compliment if there ever was one. "You do not chatter, you do not engage. This is a rare quality." Ilara's throat went dry. She didn't know what scared her more, being noticed or being ignored. "Thank you, Anya." "It is not a compliment. It is an observation." Anya's gaze was heavy, pinning her to the spot. "Because of this, you have been given a new assignment, a permanent one." Anya held out a single, heavy iron key. It was old, ancient even, rusted and ornate, a key from another time. Ilara had seen it before, hanging on a hook in Anya's office, a hook labeled with a single chilling word, forbidden. Her thoughts spun. What is the assignment?" Anya's lips thinned into a severe line. "You will clean the East Wing." The air rushed from Ilara's lungs. The East Wing, the cursed wing, the place where the Alpha's son, the broken heir, was kept. A place no one had properly entered in years. A shiver traced its way down her spine. Maybe it was fate, a cruel joke played by the moon goddess herself. She was the silent maid, sent to the silent prince. Before she could move, Anya pressed the cold, heavy key into her palm. "Your duties begin at dusk, and you will follow 3 rules." Anya held up a finger. 1, you do not speak to the Alpha's son. 2, you do not look at him. Her second finger joined the first, then her gaze hardened. And 3, you will report anything, unusual, directly to me. You are a shadow, Ilara. You are my eyes and ears. Do you understand? Ilara could only nod, the word yes, a knot of terror in her throat. The key felt like a block of ice in her hand, yet it burned. It was a brand, marking her for a fate she couldn't begin to imagine. As Anya walked away, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall, Ilara's world tilted. She was no longer invisible. To make things worse, she was now the keeper of the pack's most painful secret.
Silence was a language. He knew its every nuance. There was the heavy, suffocating silence of his father's disappointment. There was the empty, echoing silence of the hallways in the East Wing, full of ghosts and memories. And then there was his silence. A jagged, broken thing. A prison of glass built around him the day his mother died, From his window, the world was a painting he couldn't touch. He watched the pack warriors train in the courtyard below. Their movements were a symphony of violence and grace. He could feel the faint, dull thrum of their minds, the telepathic boasts and challenges, like music heard through a thick wall. It was a world he was born to lead, yet one he could never join. He was the future alpha who couldn't speak the oath, the wolf who couldn't howl. His gaze drifted, away from the snarling warriors, past the manicured hedges, to the edge of the woods. There, a lone figure knelt by the rose bushes. A maid. He'd seen her before, a fleeting shadow in the halls. Her name was... He didn't know. But then she had a quietness about her that wasn't like the others. It wasn't the subservient silence of a servant. No. It was something deeper. Something that felt familiar, like his. She moved with a gentle grace, her hands tending to the flowers. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. For a moment she was just a girl, and they were the only two people in the world. As if pulled by a string, his own hand rose, his fingers tracing her shape on the cold windowpane. A splash of color in his gray, silent world. A single, solitary flame in the dark. And then he felt it. A presence in his mind. Not words, never words. Just a feeling. A cold wave of crushing disappointment. So familiar it was like a part of his own skin. Father. The moment shattered. The color faded. The girl by the roses was just a servant again, and he was just the broken heir, hiding in his cage. He turned away from the window, the jagged edges of his silence pressing in on him. He didn't know why, but the disappointment felt sharper this time. More importantly, it felt like he had just lost something he never even had. He sank onto the edge of his bed, the dust motes dancing in the fading light, and waited for the darkness to close in.
That night, the manor felt different. The usual hum of shared thoughts felt sharper, more agitated. Whispers about the alpha's mood, about the upcoming full moon, about the rival pack sniffing at their borders. They were all there, a current of anxiety in the air that she could feel but not understand. But then, it didn't matter. Her world had shrunk to the cold, iron key in her pocket and the hallway that stretched before her like a throat preparing to swallow her whole. The door to the east wing was oak and banded with iron. It hadn't been opened in years. The key groaned in the lock, the sound deafening in the quiet corridor. With a push, the door swung inward, releasing a sigh of stale air and forgotten things. Dust, decay, and something else. Something that smelled like dried lavender and old grief. Her heart skipped. Her instructions were clear. Clean the main sitting room. So, with every heartbeat thudding in her ears, she stepped across the threshold. Her small cart, with its buckets and rags, rattled behind her. The sitting room was a tomb. Furniture huddled under white sheets like a family of ghosts. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, sparkling like diamond dust in the single beam of moonlight that pierced the gloom from a tall, grime-covered window. The silence here was different. It wasn't the powerful, oppressive silence of the alpha. Rather, it was a fragile, sad silence. A silence that held a story. She set to work, her movements slow and deliberate. She pulled the sheet off a grand piano, the white cloth billowing down like a collapsing cloud. She ran a damp rag over the keys, each one a yellowed tooth in a silent mouth. She worked because it was the only thing she could do. She worked because if she stopped, the fear would drown her. Then she heard it. A sound so small, so out of place, she thought she'd imagined it. A soft, hitching breath. Before she could move, her body went rigid. Her instincts surged. She wasn't alone. Her gaze darted around the massive room, her eyes struggling to adjust to the deep shadows. There, in the far corner, tucked away in an alcove beneath the tall, moonlit window. A figure. Huddled on the floor, his knees drawn to his chest, was a young man. Silver moonlight spilled over his dark hair, turning it the color of midnight. His shoulders were shaking. In that moment, she knew. This was him, Luca, the Alpha's son, the silent heir. And he was crying. Without a sound, without a single tear falling, he was weeping as if his heart was breaking. And she let it happen because she understood that kind of grief, the kind that was too deep for noise. Her training screamed at her to leave. You are a shadow. Don't look. Don't speak. But her heart ached. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. Her feet, as if they had a mind of their own, took a single silent step forward. Her feet were frozen to the floor. Every survival instinct she had honed over a lifetime of hiding screamed at her to turn, to run, to become the shadow Anya demanded she be. But she couldn't. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move. Because his silence was not the proud, powerful silence of an alpha. It was a broken, wounded silence. A silence she knew in her own bones. In that moment, she saw not the feared heir of the Silver Moon Pack, but a boy drowning in an ocean no one else could see. Her human mother had told her stories about the sea, a vast, lonely expanse of water that could hold its secrets for 1,000 years. Luca looked like he was at the bottom of it. So she stayed. It was a small rebellion, a quiet choice that felt louder than a shout in her silent mind. Her body moved on instinct, her heart taking control from her terrified brain. Before she could second-guess it, before she could let the fear win, her hands lifted in the sliver of moonlight. They trembled, but she forced them steady. It was a language of ghosts, she thought, remembering her mother's patient hands shaping words in the air, a secret tongue just for them, a gift from a world Alara barely remembered, a world before the wolves. Her fingers slowly, deliberately, formed a question, a simple, impossible question. Are you hurt? As if fate demanded it, his head snapped up. The moment their eyes locked, the world seemed to stop spinning. His eyes weren't angry or cruel, as she'd heard the whispers say. They were golden, like honey in the moonlight, and they were filled with a storm of shock and sorrow. And for the first time in her life, Alara didn't feel like a half-blood outcast. She felt like someone who had just thrown a lifeline.
A flicker of movement. He felt the shift in the air a second before he saw her. His entire body went rigid, shame and fury warring inside him. A servant. A maid. She had seen him at his weakest, a pathetic child crying in the dark. He braced himself for the inevitable, the quick, averted gaze of pity, the flicker of fear, the hurried retreat. He had seen it 1,000 times. He knew the dance of disgust and discomfort that his presence caused. But then, he saw her eyes, and the world he knew, the gray, muffled, lonely world, cracked down the middle. There was no pity in her gaze, there was no fear, there was no disgust. There was only a deep, still, shocking well of understanding, as if she were looking at a reflection instead of a monster. Between one breath and the next, her hands lifted. He watched, mesmerized as her fingers moved in the moonlight. The movements were hesitant, but the shapes were perfect, unmistakable. A language he hadn't seen spoken since he was a small boy, when his mother had insisted on tutors for every possible form of communication, just in case. It was a language he thought he had forgotten. Are you hurt? The silent words struck him with the force of a physical blow. His breath caught. It wasn't just a question. It was an acknowledgement. She wasn't speaking at him or around him. She was speaking to him, to the person trapped inside the silent prison. In the span of a breath, a surge of something hot and fierce, something that felt terrifyingly like hope, roared to life in his chest. His own hands felt like stone, stiff, unused. But he had to answer. He had to. He owed it to the impossible girl who saw him, who truly saw him. Slowly, clumsily, he lifted one hand. His fingers fumbled, but he managed to form the sign. A simple, shaky response that felt like the most important word he had ever spoken. No. Her face softened and a small, sad smile touched her lips. She moved her hands again, more confidently this time. You're not alone. Something inside him, something that had been frozen solid for years.
The tension broke. A silent conversation began to flow between them in the dusty, moonlit room. He was clumsy with the language, his signs rusty and slow, but his eyes were alive with a desperate, hungry focus. She learned that the silence had started after his mother's death. Not only that, she learned that the pressure from his father to be a proper heir was a constant, crushing weight. She didn't tell him her secrets, not the truth of her blood, or the story of her stripped voice mark, but she didn't have to. Truth be told, he didn't ask. He just seemed to understand her quietness, her otherness. She signed her name, Elara. He watched her fingers, then signed his own, Luca. When her name left his hands, a strange warmth bloomed beneath her skin. For the first time, her name felt real. But then a sound from the hall. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, confident, the sound of authority, the sound of the alpha. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. There was no escape. The room had only one exit, and the footsteps were getting closer. This was it. She was dead. Her illegal, half-blood existence was over because she had shown a moment of foolish compassion. Without warning, before she could even process what was happening, Luca moved. He didn't make a sound. He simply rose to his feet in one fluid motion, positioning his body between her and the doorway. It wasn't a big movement, but it was enough to shield the dark alcove where she stood. His message was clear. Hide. Her body moved on instinct. She scrambled backward, slipping behind a huge, heavy tapestry that depicted a great white wolf howling at the moon. The fabric was thick with the dust of ages and smelled like forgotten time. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a drum of pure terror. Through a small gap in the weave, she watched as Alpha Valerius entered the room. He was a terrifying presence, radiating power and impatience. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He projected a feeling, a wave of cold disappointment and command, directly at his son. Luca didn't flinch. He just stood there, his back straight, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A silent denial, a silent lie. She is not here. Elara held her breath. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The Alpha stared at his son for a long, agonizing moment, his jaw tight. Eventually, with a final cutting wave of frustration, he turned and stalked out of the room. The footsteps faded down the hall. In the quiet that followed, Elara's legs felt weak. She didn't know how long she stood there, hidden behind the wolf, her world tilted on its axis. Finally, she pushed the heavy fabric aside and stepped back into the moonlight. Luca was still standing there, watching the doorway. Moments later, he turned to face her. His golden eyes met hers in the darkness. He had protected her. He, the broken heir, had shielded her, the half-blood nobody, from the most powerful wolf in the pack. Without another word, a new truth settled between them. They were not just a maid and an heir anymore. They were a secret, and that secret was the most dangerous and the most precious thing in the world.
Their secret became a ritual. As dusk fell each night, the East Wing would wake up. Elara would arrive with her cleaning cart, a perfect excuse, and Luca would be waiting. He would be waiting by the tall window, watching the moon rise, his golden eyes reflecting the stars. And in their silent, dusty sanctuary, a new world was born. Because of that, the rest of the manor, with its screaming telepathic silence and its rigid rules, would simply melt away. At first, their conversations were simple. She would teach him the proper signs for things in the room: piano, chair, moonlight. He was a quick study, his frustration with his own clumsy fingers soon giving way to a fluid grace. What followed was a change in him. The haunted look in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a sharp, intelligent focus. He was not just learning a language. He was reclaiming a voice. Soon after, the stories began to unfold. He told her about his mother. He signed how she used to fill the wing with the scent of lavender to calm his father's temper. He described her laugh, not with a sound, but by shaping his hands like a bird taking flight. In return, Ilara shared the safe parts of her own past. She told him about her human mother, a woman who loved the stars. That night, she pointed through the grimy window at the dark velvet sky. "That one," she signed, her fingers tracing a pattern in the air, "is the great wolf. My mother said he guards the gate to the spirit world." Luca watched her hands, then looked up at the sky. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, the first she had ever seen. "My mother said the stars were holes in the blanket of night, letting the light of the moon goddess shine through." A comfortable quiet settled between them. The air was thick with the smell of old books and lemon polish, a scent she was beginning to associate with peace. He was no longer the broken heir, and she was no longer the outcast maid. In this room, under the watchful eyes of the stars, they were just Luca and Ilara. But then, the peace shattered. Luca turned to her, his smile gone, his gaze suddenly serious, intense. The moment their eyes locked, she knew the question before he even asked it. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, leaving her no room to misunderstand. "Why are you not connected to the pack's speech?" Her breath caught. The air thickened. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was a roaring void. He was asking her to reveal the one secret that would sign her death warrant. He was asking her why she was broken, and deep down she knew the truth. There was no safe answer.
Her blood ran cold. Her hands, which had been so fluid and graceful moments before, felt like clumsy blocks of ice. A lie. She needed a lie. "I am a late bloomer," she signed, the movement jerky and unconvincing. "The pack healers say it will come in time." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She hated it. What's worse, she hated the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. He knew she was lying, but he, in an act of kindness that almost broke her heart, simply nodded and let the silence stretch. He didn't push. Still, the perfect, fragile world they had built now had a crack right down the middle. She made her excuses soon after, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. She had to get out. She had to breathe. The journey back through the manor was a blur of shadows and fear. She avoided the main halls, instead taking the narrow, cold servants' corridors that snaked through the guts of the building. She just wanted the safety of her small, lonely room. But then, a figure stepped out from a dark archway, blocking her path. "You're out late." Ilara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Lyra, the warrior from the hunt. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent like a hawk's, raked over Ilara. She was lean and hard, all corded muscle and contained energy, and her scent was like cold steel and winter pine. She was dangerous. More importantly, she was dangerous because she saw things other wolves missed. "Anya had me polishing the silver in the West Gallery," Ilara stammered, the lie feeling flimsy and thin. Lyra took a step closer, her head tilted. She sniffed the air once, a short, sharp intake of breath. "That's not what you smell like," she said, her voice a low, predatory purr. "You smell of dust, of sorrow." Her silver eyes narrowed. "You smell of the East Wing." The accusation was a physical blow. Ilara's thoughts spun. She had no defense, no explanation. Lyra smiled, a cold, sharp thing with no warmth in it. "The air is a wounded animal, little mouse. Be careful. Wounded things are known to bite." Without another word, she turned and disappeared back into the shadows, as silent as she had appeared. Ilara didn't breathe until the warrior's scent had faded completely. Her sanctuary was no longer safe. It had a guard at the gates, and that guard was watching her.
He knew she was lying. The hurt was a sharp, surprising sting. In their silent world, he had thought there would be no lies. On the other hand, he understood. He had his own secrets, his own prison. Who was he to demand she unlock hers? When she arrived the next night, the fear was a cloud around her, a scent so strong it almost choked him. He could feel the echo of her encounter with Lyra, but his own troubles were a storm inside him, and they broke loose before he could stop them. "The elders are pushing my father," he signed, his hands moving with a frantic, angry energy. "They want me to perform the ritual of dominance." He watched her face, saw her confusion, and explained. It was an ancient, brutal trial. An heir, on the cusp of his first transformation, would be pitted against a senior warrior. The pain and the fury of the fight was meant to be the catalyst, the final, violent push needed to force the inner wolf to the surface. It was a test of strength, of will, of dominance. "They think it will break the silence," he signed, the last words heavy with scorn. "They think it will make me whole." He paced the length of the moonbeam, his shadow a distorted, monstrous thing on the floor. He stopped and faced her, his vulnerability a raw, open wound. "But what if there is nothing inside me to break free?" The question hung between them, terrible and fragile. "What if I am just this, silent, empty, unworthy of my name, unworthy of being an alpha?" He expected her to look away. He expected the pity he saw in everyone else's eyes. Instead, her expression hardened, not with pity, but with a fierce, protective anger that stunned him. She stepped forward, closing the space between them until she was so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her. "Your worth is not in a title," she signed, her movements sharp and certain. "It is not in a voice or a wolf, it is in here." And then she did the impossible. Without thinking, her body moving on instinct, she reached out. She pressed her small, warm palm flat against his chest, directly over his heart. The moment her skin made contact, a jolt. It was not a thought. It was not a feeling. It was energy. A silent clap of thunder, a flash of warm, silver lightning that shot from her hand, through his chest and straight to the core of his soul. He gasped, a real, audible sound torn from his throat. Her eyes went wide, her lips parting in a silent "oh" of shock. In that single heartbeat, the world shifted. They pulled their hands back as if burned, staring at each other. The air between them was no longer just filled with secrets and stories. It was alive. It was buzzing. It was charged with a spark of raw, untamed magic that neither of them could possibly understand.
The air between them had changed. Ever since that jolt of silver lightning, their quiet sanctuary in the East Wing felt charged. The dust motes dancing in the moonlight seemed to buzz with a life of their own. The space between them burned, a silent hum of energy that was both terrifying and thrilling. Tonight, it was worse. Or maybe it was better, because tonight was the blood moon. A strange crimson light bled through the tall window, painting the room in shades of rust and rose. It was a night of raw instinct, a night when every werewolf's senses were heightened, when emotions ran like a river overflowing its banks. Ilara could feel it in her own blood, a wild, restless energy that made her skin tingle. She and Luca stood on opposite sides of the room, the distance feeling both like a canyon and no space at all. He watched her, his golden eyes glowing with an unnerving intensity in the red light. Finally, he moved. His hands rose, the question simple but heavy with meaning. "What was that? What did we feel?" Her own hands trembled as she answered, "I don't know." And it was the honest truth. She had no explanation for the magic that had sparked between them, a magic that felt as old as the moon itself. He took a step closer. The air thickened. His scent, wild herbs and lonely night air, was stronger now, wrapping around her, pulling her in. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The logical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive for so long, screamed at her to run. But her soul answered him. As if the world narrowed to just the two of them, she took a step closer, too. In that moment, Under the weight of his stare and the intoxicating pull of the blood moon, her deepest secret felt like a physical weight she could no longer carry. Before the words left her lips, she knew she was going to say them. The need for him to know, to truly know her, was greater than her fear of death. "I have to tell you something," she signed, her movements desperate, pleading for him to understand. "The reason I am not in the pack's speech, it is because I am a half-blood." She watched his face for the flicker of disgust, the recoil of a pureblood discovering an abomination in his midst. She braced for it. Instead, his expression softened. She pushed on, the confession tumbling from her hands. "My voice mark, the bond that connects us. It was stripped from me when I was a child. It was torn out. That is why I am silent. That is why I am broken." A single tear, hot and traitorous, escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He didn't hesitate. In 2 long strides, he closed the distance between them. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He simply reached out and gently, so gently, wiped the tear away with his thumb. His touch was electric, a jolt of pure, undiluted warmth. Then his hands moved, his signs fierce and certain, a shield against her shame. "You are not broken," he signed, his golden eyes blazing. "And neither am I. We are different, and our silence speaks to each other." Without another word, he lowered his head. The world tilted. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was the taste of moonlight and sorrow and a hope so fierce it burned. It was every unspoken word, every lonely night, every shared secret crashing together. And she let it happen. Something inside her shifted, a lock turning in a door she never knew existed. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted, and she kissed him back, pouring all her fear and all her longing into that one, impossible moment. The next day, every nerve in her body was singing. The memory of the kiss was a fire blooming beneath her skin. She felt reckless and terrified, and more alive than she had ever been. She was cleaning in the main hall when Anya intercepted her, her face as stern as ever, yet there was a strange flicker in her eyes. "There is a task," Anya said, her voice clipped. "The East Wing archives, the sealed section behind the library, the winter linens are stored there. Fetch them." It was a strange request. No one had entered that part of the wing in a decade. Still, Ilara nodded obediently. Maybe it was fate. The East Wing was her world now, and she felt a strange pull toward its deepest secrets. The door to the sealed archive groaned in protest, revealing a room shrouded in darkness and the thick, sweet smell of decaying paper. Trunks were stacked to the ceiling, and shelves overflowed with forgotten records. It felt like a dragon's hoard of memories. Finding the linen trunk was easy enough, but as she pulled the heavy chest away from the wall, her foot caught on a loose floorboard. She stumbled, and a stack of old, leather-bound books tumbled to the ground with a dusty thump. One of them fell open. Tucked between the pages was a smaller book, a delicate journal bound in dark blue leather with the silver crest of the Luna, Luca's mother, embossed on the cover. Her breath caught. This was wrong. This was private. But as if her hands were not her own, she picked it up. Her fingers traced the elegant crest. With a surge of guilt and undeniable curiosity, she opened it. The handwriting inside was elegant, but frantic. The early entries were full of joy, of a mother's love for her newborn son, Luca. But then the tone shifted. October 12th, one entry read, "Something is wrong. Valerius feels it too. A shadow hangs over our son, not sickness, something older, darker." Ilara's blood went cold. She kept reading, her eyes flying across the page. November 3rd. I found it, an old text hidden away. It speaks of blood curses, a cowardly magic used to steal power. It describes a ritual, a curse that can be placed on an alpha's bloodline, designed to lie dormant, unseen until the moment of succession. Her heart began to pound. November 5th. Oh, goddess, no. The curse matches his symptoms perfectly. The silence. It is not from trauma. It is the curse's anchor, growing stronger every day. The text is clear. Upon the alpha's death or incapacitation, the magic will activate. It will seal his throat. It will crush his voice box. It will ensure he can never speak the oath of ascension. The journal slipped from her numb fingers. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Luca wasn't broken. He wasn't flawed. He had been sabotaged. His silence wasn't a prison of grief. It was the dormant stage of a weapon designed to destroy him and his entire bloodline. Before the truth could fully unravel in her mind, she heard a sound, footsteps, approaching the archive door. Without thinking, she snatched the journal from the floor and shoved it deep into the pocket of her apron, her mind a screaming vortex of terror.
For the first time in years, the world had color. The kiss had changed everything. It was a promise that he wasn't alone, that his silence didn't make him unworthy of love. He felt a new strength, a new resolve building in his chest. The feeling did not last. He was summoned to a formal pack council meeting. He hated them. The room was always filled with the silent, judgmental thoughts of the elders, a chorus of doubt and pity directed at him. His father, Alpha Valerius, stood at the head of the great oak table, his face grim. A warrior, his mind broadcasting images of blood and fire, was giving a report. The Bloodfang Pack, a rival clan known for their brutality, had attacked their southern border patrol. They hadn't just fought, they had slaughtered them. It was a message. As the warrior's report finished, a new voice sliced through the minds of everyone in the room. It was telepathic, but not from anyone present. It was an intrusion, an act of supreme arrogance and power. The voice was like splintered ice, dripping with contempt. It was Kale, the Bloodfang Alpha. Valerius, the voice sneered, a sound that made Luca's skin crawl. Your borders are as weak as your bloodline. A wave of silent fury erupted from the elders. His father's mind became a wall of impenetrable rage. But then the voice directed its next words like a poisoned dart, straight at the heart of their pack's biggest secret, straight at him. A silent son is no son at all. He cannot protect your lands. He cannot protect you. The world tilted. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. Kale didn't just know he was mute. He was using it as a weapon of war. He was twisting their shame into a declaration of his own strength. The curse. Ilara. The journal she had just found. The attack. Kale's specific, cruel taunt. It wasn't a coincidence. In that moment, a chilling, absolute certainty settled in his bones. The enemy at their gates knew about the curse. They were not just attacking his pack. They were waiting for the magical trap to spring. He had to find Ilara. He had to warn her. Now. The moment Luca burst into the east wing, Ilara knew. She saw the storm in his eyes, the same terror that was clawing its way up her own throat. Kale, he signed, his hands a blur of frantic energy. He knows. He spoke in the council. He taunted my father with my silence. The two halves of their nightmare slammed together. Her discovery. His confirmation. It wasn't just a curse. It was a weapon being aimed at them by an enemy who was already at their gates. As the silence roared around them, Ilara pulled the small leather-bound journal from her apron. Her hands trembled as she held it out to him. Your mother, she signed, her heart aching for the pain she was about to give him. She knew. He took the journal. He sank onto the edge of a dusty chaise lounge and began to read. Ilara watched as a decade of grief and confusion melted away from his face, replaced by something new. Something harder. A cold, sharp, clarifying rage. His mother hadn't been just a victim of sorrow. She had been a warrior fighting a secret war to save him. And the curse. The curse wasn't a mark of his own failure. It was a declaration of war made against him before he could even speak his own name. which meant he could finally fight back. His fingers flew across the pages until he stopped at the last, frantic entry. He held it up for her to see. His mother had written about a sliver of hope, a legend whispered among the oldest shifter families. The curse can be undone, the passage read, but only by a voice of true belonging, speaking the heir's wolf's heart name. A heart name? What was a heart name? It was a question with no answer, a key with no lock. Yet it was the first real weapon they had. "We fight," Luca signed, his gaze meeting hers, his eyes blazing with a fire she had never seen before. It was no longer a question of survival. This was about reclamation, about vengeance. Together. Together. She signed back, her own resolve hardening. In that moment, they were no longer hiding. They were hunting. But then, his eyes scanned the page again, and he pointed to a line she had missed in her panic. His mother had noted the curse's magic seemed to thin, to become unstable, under the light of the blood moon. Luca looked up at her, his expression grim. "The annual blood moon hunt," he signed. "It's tonight." As if fate demanded it, the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. It was either a trap or an opportunity.
The forest was a terrifying place at night, especially under the bloody eye of the moon. Ilara crouched in the undergrowth, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had followed them. She had to. Because the journal's warning was a scream in her mind. She couldn't let Luca go into the woods alone tonight. She used the shadows, moving with a servant's practiced invisibility, her senses overwhelmed by the smell of damp earth, pine, and the primal metallic scent of the hunt. The Silver Moon hunting party moved like gray ghosts through the trees. Luca was among them, flanked by two of his father's most trusted guards. He looked small and vulnerable without the ability to shift, a boy playing at being a wolf. Without warning, the world exploded. Shadows detached themselves from the trees. Dark-furred wolves, bigger and leaner than the Silver Moon wolves, burst from the darkness. Bloodfang. The attack was brutally efficient, a coordinated strike designed for one purpose: chaos. As the Silver Moon guards scrambled to form a defensive circle, two of the Bloodfang warriors broke through. They weren't fighting randomly. They were flanking Luca, separating him from his protectors with terrifying precision. It was an assassination attempt. Ilara's world narrowed to a single point of terror. She watched as one of the guards was thrown aside, his yelp cut short. The other was locked in a brutal fight, teeth and claws flashing. And Luca was alone. A massive, snarling black wolf, its eyes glowing with red malice, cornered him against an ancient oak tree. Time stood still. The warrior raised a paw, claws like black daggers glinting in the moonlight, ready for the killing blow. Before she could think, her body moved on instinct. Her fear for him was a fire that burned away all her caution. Her hand closed around a heavy, sharp-edged rock from the forest floor. As the silence stretched, she rose from her hiding spot, and with a surge of adrenaline that set her half-blood heritage singing through her veins, she threw it. Her aim was true, her speed was unnatural. The rock flew through the air and slammed into the side of the warrior's massive head with a sickening crack. It wasn't enough to kill it, but it was enough. The wolf roared in pain and fury, stumbling, its head shaking. That single vital second was all Luca's remaining guard needed. He lunged, sinking his teeth into the attacker's leg, and the tide turned. In the ensuing chaos of snapping jaws and furious growls, Ilara locked eyes with someone across the small clearing. It was Lyra. The she-wolf wasn't looking at the fight. Her silver eyes were wide, fixed directly on Ilara, her expression a frozen mask of pure shock and dawning, terrible understanding. She had seen it. She had seen everything. As the Bloodfang wolves suddenly retreated back into the forest, a new, cold dread washed over Ilara. The battle might be over, but her war had just begun. The manor was in an uproar. Wounded warriors were being helped through the main doors, their telepathic groans of pain a sickening, silent wave. In the chaos, Ilara tried to disappear. She just needed to get back to the servants' quarters, to melt back into the shadows where she belonged. But then, a hand clamped down on her arm, the grip like iron. "You!" The voice was a low snarl. Ilara turned, her heart sinking into a pit of ice. It was Lyra. Her silver eyes were chips of granite, cold and hard and unforgiving. "We need to talk," Lyra growled, and began to drag Ilara away from the crowded hall, down a cold, empty corridor toward the kitchens. She shoved Ilara against the stone wall, her body blocking any chance of escape. There was no suspicion in her eyes anymore, only certainty, only contempt. "I saw you," Lyra's voice was dangerously quiet. "In the woods, that throw, the speed." She leaned in, her scent of pine and steel overwhelming. "I have been watching you, little mouse. You are too quiet. You stay too long in the East Wing." Her gaze narrowed to slits. "Now tell me, what are you?" Ilara's voice trembled. I'm just a maid." "Liar!" Lyra's shout echoed in the corridor. "No human can move that fast. No human could make a throw with that kind of force." Her eyes blazed with fury and a fanatic's conviction. "You're a spy, aren't you? A blood-fang witch, sent here to weave your spells around our broken heir. Is this your magic? Is his silence your doing?" Every word was a nail in her coffin. The truth was a death sentence, and every lie was a confirmation of guilt. She was trapped. Deep down, she knew the truth. It was over. "You will answer to the Alpha," Lyra snarled, her fingers digging painfully into Ilara's arm. And with a vicious tug, she began to drag her out of the corridor, back toward the Great Hall, back toward the law of the pack, back toward her execution.
Powerless. He watched them drag Ilara away, her terrified eyes searching for his. He opened his mouth to shout, to roar, to protest, but only silence came out. A useless, damning silence. His guards held him back, their telepathic thoughts a wall of grim duty. "It is for the council to decide, young Alpha." He was their heir, yet he was a prisoner in his own home. But then, before he could fight his way free, the world exploded. Boom. The very stones of the manor shuddered. A wave of psychic terror washed through the pack as the great iron-studded gates which had stood for centuries were blasted inward. The ambush hadn't been the main attack. It was just a distraction. To make things worse, Kale was not just at their gates. He was inside. From a balcony overlooking the main courtyard, Luca watched the nightmare unfold. Bloodfang warriors poured into the breach, a tide of black and gray fur crashing against the Silver Moon defenders. And at their head was a wolf so large, so monstrously powerful, it seemed to suck the very light from the air around it. Kale. A silver blur shot past Luca's vantage point. His father, Alpha Valerius, in his massive wolf form, leaped from the battlements and slammed into the fray. He was a beacon of silver light in the swirling darkness, a rallying point for his warriors. For a moment, hope surged in Luca's chest. As if summoned, Kale broke from the main fight and charged directly at his father. The two alphas collided in a cataclysm of snapping jaws and tearing claws. It was a battle of titans, a primal war for dominance. But his father was already weary, his energy drained from the earlier telepathic battles and the shock of the attack. Luca watched in frozen, abject horror as Kale exploited a moment of weakness. He saw the black wolf's jaws lock onto his father's shoulder. He saw the silver form stumble, buckle, and then fall. He saw his father, his powerful, invincible father, shift back into his human form, broken and bleeding on the stones of the courtyard. In that instant, Luca felt a cold, terrifying pressure wrap around his own throat, a magical tightening, a phantom hand squeezing, cutting off the air he wasn't even breathing. The curse. It was responding to his father's fall. It was beginning. Without warning, his own guards grabbed him, their grips like iron. "For your safety, my lord," one of them projected, and they began dragging him back inside, away from the battle, away from his father. He was being locked away while his world burned down around him.
The great hall was a scene from a nightmare. The air was thick with the coppery tang of blood and the silent, psychic screams of the wounded. Lyra didn't hesitate. She dragged Alara through the chaos and threw her onto the floor at the feet of the pack elders, who were gathered around their fallen alpha. Valerius lay on a pallet of furs, his breathing shallow, his eyes glassy with pain. This was not a trial. It was a desperate search for a sacrifice. "This is the one!" Lyra's voice rang with righteous fury, cutting through the din. "The half-blood witch! I saw her in the woods, using her unnatural speed to aid the enemy's ambush." She pointed a trembling, blood-stained finger at Alara. "She has been in the East Wing for weeks, weaving her dark magic around the heir, deepening his curse. This attack, our Alpha's fall, it is her doing. She is the source of this weakness." The elders, their faces grim masks of fear and desperation, turned their collective gaze on Alara. She tried to speak, to deny it, but her throat was locked with terror. What could she say? The truth, that she was a half-blood who had fallen in love with their son and discovered a generations-old curse, was even more insane than the lie Lyra was telling. Her silence was her confession. An old, grizzled wolf named Gideon, his face a roadmap of ancient scars, stepped forward. His eyes, full of sorrow and fury, settled on her. He didn't need proof, he just needed someone to blame. "Witchcraft," he rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. "Treason against the Silvermoon Pack." He raised his hand, pointing at her as if his very finger could strike her down. "The sentence is death, at dawn." A wave of cold resignation washed over her. This was it. This was the end she had been running from her entire life. As two warriors grabbed her arms to haul her away, her eyes desperately searched the chaotic room, and she found him. Across the hall, Luca was fighting his guards, his face a silent, screaming mask of pure agony. Their eyes locked for one single shattering moment, a frantic, heartbreaking goodbye that held a universe of unspoken words. Then, the heavy dungeon door slammed shut, and her world plunged into absolute darkness.
He was in his room. The beautiful, lonely room in the East Wing that had become his and Alara's sanctuary was now his prison. The door was barred from the outside. The window overlooked a burning courtyard. The scent of her, lemon oil and starlight, still lingered in the air, a ghost to mock him. The door opened. It was Elder Gideon, his face etched with a terrible, weary finality. "The Alpha is dying," Gideon said, his telepathic voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The pack is falling. We cannot be led by—" Silence. Luca stared at him, a cold dread seeping into his bones. "The council has made a decision," Gideon continued. "For the survival of the pack, you are formally disinherited. We will choose a new Alpha from among the senior warriors, someone who can lead the fight." The words were like stones, each one striking him, breaking him. He had lost his father. He had lost Alara to a lie he couldn't refute. And now he had lost his name, his future, his birthright. He was no longer Luca Valerius, future Alpha. He was nothing. The last flicker of hope inside him was extinguished, and the silence in the room finally, completely, matched the utter void in his soul. All was lost. She was in the dark. The dungeon was cold, the stone floor damp and unforgiving. The distant sounds of battle were muted, a faint rhythmic thudding like a dying heartbeat. She was alone, with nothing but the truth she had spent her life hiding from. Deep down, she knew this was her own fault. Her core flaw, her belief that she was worthless, that her silence and her blood were a shameful stain, had brought her here. She was so afraid of her own truth, so terrified of being seen, that she had let them believe the lies. Her fear hadn't kept her safe. It had only guaranteed her destruction. She thought of her mother, of the stories of brave heroines who fought against the darkness. But she was no heroine. She was a coward who had let her fear doom the only person who had ever made her feel whole. She curled into a ball on the cold floor, the last of her strength leaving her. Hope felt like a cruel joke. The love that had bloomed so brightly in the silent, moonlit room was about to be extinguished in a cold, dark cell. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, did not fight the silence. She let it swallow her whole. She would wait for the dawn. She would wait for the end.
In the cold, suffocating darkness of the dungeon, there was only despair. Hope was a lie. Love was a foolish dream. The dawn would come, and with it, the end. She closed her eyes, ready for the silence to claim her completely. But then, a whisper, not a sound, a memory, words from a dead woman's journal, echoing in the ruins of her mind, a voice of true belonging, a wolf's heart name. The words had been a lifeline, but now they felt like a taunt. What was a true belonging in a world that had never wanted her? She was a half-blood, an outcast. She belonged nowhere, and yet. Her heart ached with a feeling so powerful, so absolute, it felt like the only real thing left. Her love for Luca. It didn't belong to the pack, or its laws, or its bloodlines. It belonged only to them, a secret kingdom of two built in a dusty, moonlit room. As if the world tilted, a new thought struck her with the force of lightning. That was a true belonging, and a heart name. It wasn't a name you were given. It was a name you were. It was the truth of your soul. Who was Luca? Not the broken heir, not the silent prince. He was the fierce protector who had stood against his own father for her. He was the gentle soul who had learned a forgotten language just to hear her speak. He was the quiet strength that had weathered a storm of grief. In the span of a breath, she knew. The name bloomed in her mind, a word of thunder and silver, a word of such perfect, terrible power it made her gasp. It was his. She knew it like she knew the beating of her own heart. In that instant, everything changed. Despair was burned away by a clean, white-hot certainty. Her purpose was not to die in this cell. Her purpose was to get to him, to speak the name. As if fate itself had heard her vow, a faint scraping sound came from the heavy cell door. The small slot slid open, and a pair of wrinkled, weary eyes peered through. It was an old kitchen servant, a she-wolf named Morwen, a woman whose kindness was a quiet rebellion in this harsh place. "Your mother," the old wolf whispered, her voice a dry crackle. "She was a fighter, too. She never bowed." A key slid through the slot, landing on the stone floor with a soft clink. Moments later, the footsteps faded away. Ilara scrambled forward, her fingers closing around the cold, heavy iron. It was not just a key, it was a weapon. It was a chance. It was everything.
The sounds of the final battle were the sounds of his world dying. From his prison he heard the roars of the Bloodfang warriors, the clash of steel, the silent, psychic screams of his packmates. He was disinherited. Ilara was condemned. His father was dying. There was nothing left to lose. And because of that, he was finally free. He was no longer fighting for a title he felt unworthy of. He was fighting for his home, for the memory of his mother, for a girl with starlight in her eyes who had shown him that a voice was not needed to be heard. His gaze fell upon it. Mounted on the wall, gleaming in the fiery light from the burning courtyard, was his father's ceremonial sword. A blade for an alpha. He was not an alpha. But then, he walked toward it, his steps steady, his resolve a core of cold, hard steel inside him. He would not die a prisoner in a locked room. He wrapped his hands around the leather-bound hilt. The weight of it felt right. It felt like a promise. With a roar that was nothing but silent, desperate breath, he swung the heavy sword. The blade bit deep into the wood of the door, once, twice, shattering the lock and the bar that held it shut. He kicked the splintered door open and stepped out into the chaos of the burning hallway. He was ready to die. But then he felt it. Not a thought. Not a sound. It was a frantic, desperate pulse in his soul, a string pulling taut between him and someone else. A call he knew without question. Ilara.
The manor was a labyrinth of fire and shadow. Smoke burned her lungs, and the clang of fighting was a deafening roar. Ilara ran, the journal tucked in her tunic, the heart name a burning coal in her mind. She was a ghost of vengeance, her only goal to find him. At the same time, Luca moved through the chaos, his father's sword in his hand, a grim specter of a fallen line. He cut down a blood-fang warrior who lunged from a doorway, his movements clumsy but filled with a desperate strength. He was heading for the Great Hall, for the heart of the battle. And then, across a corridor filled with smoke and flickering flames, they saw each other. The world narrowed to a single point. The battle, the fire, the screams, it all faded away. He was there, she was alive. They collided in the middle of the hallway, not in a gentle embrace, but in a desperate, frantic clinging. His hand cupped the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, her hands pressed against his chest, feeling the wild, thundering beat of his heart. It was a reunion that lasted only a single, breathless second, but it held a lifetime of fear and hope. There was no time. The manor was collapsing around them, her hands flew up between them, her signs a blur of desperate urgency. "The curse," she signed. "I know how. A name, your true name. I must speak it." He stared at her, his golden eyes wide in the firelight. He saw the blazing, absolute conviction on her face. He saw the impossible hope that had risen from the ashes of her despair. And he didn't question it. He didn't doubt. Truth be told, he had never trusted anyone more in his entire life. He simply nodded. Their purpose was now one. Without another silent word, he took her hand, his grip strong and sure. They turned and ran. Together, they were no longer two broken souls. They were a single, unified force, a desperate storm of love and vengeance. They fought their way through the battle, his sword clearing a path, her eyes guiding them, moving as if they had been doing this their entire lives. They reached the great carved doors of the great hall and threw them open. The scene inside was one of utter devastation. The last of the Silver Moon defenders were on their knees, bleeding, defeated, and in the center of the room, standing over the broken form of a defeated Lyra, was Kale. He was in his monstrous wolf form, a paw the size of a platter raised, his claws extended, ready to deliver the final killing blow. He was the victor. The battle was over. He had won, but then he looked up and saw them, and in the heart of his triumph, a flicker of confusion and something like fear entered his cruel red eyes.
Kale saw them. For a single frozen moment, the monstrous black wolf paused its attack, its head tilted in confusion. But then, a wave of cruel, silent laughter projected through the hall, a thought that felt like scraping rock. The silent pup and his half-blood pet, come to die together. With a final, contemptuous snarl, he dismissed the defeated Lyra and charged, a black juggernaut of muscle and fury, his sights set on ending the Silver Moon bloodline for good. He charged straight for Luca. But Ilara did not hesitate. Her world tilted. She stepped forward, placing her small body directly in the path of the charging Alpha, a tiny, fragile shield against a tidal wave of death. Time seemed to stretch, to slow down. The roars of the battle, the crackle of the flames, the screams. It all faded into a distant hum. All she could see were Luca's golden eyes. All she could feel was the fierce, unwavering truth of her love for him. All she could hear was the heart name burning in her soul, demanding to be spoken. She took a deep breath, and she opened her mouth. The sound that came out was not a word. Not just a word. It was a physical force, a shockwave of pure silver light and sound that erupted from her core. Her voice mark on her neck, The scar of her shame blazed with a light so bright it outshone the moon. She screamed his heart name, a name of thunder and silver, a name of quiet strength and fierce protection. Cairo! The moment the name left her lips, the magic of the curse shattered. A sound like 1,000 panes of glass breaking at once echoed through the hall, both in the air and in their minds. A wave of black, stagnant magic dissipated like smoke in the wind. Luca felt the cold, crushing pressure around his throat, a pressure he had lived with for so long he had forgotten it was there. Vanish. And in its place, a roar. A sound tore from his chest, not a human shout, but the raw, primal, earth-shaking roar of a wolf finally uncaged. The sound was the breaking of a dam, the eruption of a volcano, a decade of silence and grief and rage unleashed in one glorious, terrifying note. Pain and power erupted through him. Her world tilted as she watched, her heart in her throat. His bones cracked and reformed with sickening speed. Silver fur, the color of the moon itself, sprouted from his skin. He grew, his body contorting and expanding, erupting into a new shape, into his true shape. When it was over, he stood where the boy had been. A wolf, a massive, magnificent silver wolf, larger than his father, larger even than Cale. His fur seemed to drink the moonlight, and his eyes were pure, molten gold. He was no longer silent. He was no longer broken. He was no longer a prisoner. He was the true alpha.
Cale skidded to a halt, his mind reeling from the wave of raw magic. He stared at the silver wolf before him, at the small girl who glowed with a faint, silvery aura, and for the first time, the blood-fang alpha felt a sliver of fear. He lunged. The fight that followed was not a battle, it was an execution. Luca, empowered by his full alpha strength, fueled by his bond with Alara, and burning with a righteous fury, was a blur of silver lightning. He was faster. He was stronger. He was fighting for his pack, for his mate, for his stolen voice. Cale's brutal dominance was no match for a power born of love and sacrifice. The end was swift. Luca's jaws closed around the black wolf's throat, and he threw Cale to the ground with a final, contemptuous snarl. The battle was over. The war was won. As Cale's defeated form whimpered on the stone floor, the remaining Bloodfang warriors, their alpha broken, lowered their heads and surrendered. Silence fell upon the great hall. Luca, his silver fur matted with blood, turned his gaze to the surviving Silvermoon warriors. They were staring in awe. Lyra, bleeding from a dozen wounds, struggled to her knees. She looked at Luca, then at Alara, and her eyes filled with a new, profound understanding. She lowered her head, not in defeat, but in absolute, unwavering reverence. One by one, the other warriors followed. They bowed. They bowed to their true alpha and to the strange, powerful girl who had been his voice when he had none. Luca padded over to Alara, the massive wolf moving with a gentle grace that belied his power. He nudged her hand with his wet nose, his golden eyes soft, and in her mind, a new sound. A voice, clear and warm and steady, a voice she had only ever dreamed of. It was not a spoken word. It was a thought, sent only to her. My Luna.
1 month later, the full moon shone down on a healing pack. Its light was not red with blood, but a clean, hopeful silver. The great hall, its stones now scrubbed clean of the stains of battle, was filled with the entire Silvermoon pack. At the head of the room on the Alpha's dais stood Luca. He was no longer a boy, but a man, tall and confident. And at his side, her hand in his, stood Alara. He turned to his people, and when he spoke, his voice, both aloud and in their minds, was the clear, steady voice of a true leader. For generations we have been taught that strength is dominance, he said, his gaze sweeping over his pack. That power is fear. The Bloodfang pack showed us the end of that path. Destruction. He looked down at Alara, his eyes full of a love that was now the pack's founding legend. Tonight we choose a new path. Our strength will be our unity. Our power will be our compassion. We will be a pack that protects all its members, no matter their blood, no matter their voice. Later that night, they stood on the highest cliff overlooking their lands. The world was quiet, peaceful. He smiled at her, then shifted, the change as smooth and natural as breathing. The great silver wolf sat beside her, his presence a warm, solid comfort. She ran her hand through his thick fur, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart. She had found her home. He lifted his head to the moon and let out a long, clear howl. It was a song of freedom, of leadership, of a promise to his pack and his land. And then, a new sound joined his. It came from Ilara. Not a sound from her lips, but a feeling, a note of pure silver light that seemed to emanate from her soul, her own unique voice mark finally singing its true purpose. Her harmony wrapped around his howl, a shimmering, magical chord that rose into the night sky. They were two different souls, one human, one wolf, but they were one heart. And together, under the light of the full moon, they were finally, completely, singing the same song.